Welcome back to the Flyers Nitty Gritty podcast, getting gritty with it with your host, Yariv, Wolok, and my special guest for the evening, returning guests, Russ Cohen and Mike Augello. Russ and Mike, how you doing, guys? Welcome back.
Good. Yeah, great day.
Yep, I'm hoarse. I've been talking for. I've been talking for
at night, and I'm sure you've recorded a bunch.
Yeah, I've been talking for 4.5 hours and trying to talk over Eklund, who constantly interrupted me today. But he's my boss, so he can do that. He has the free will to do that.
Well, today was kind of a big day for you guys, right? Because today was a trade deadline as we're recording this, right? And typically you guys are probably from the beginning of the day, I would say very early.
Yeah, I mean, hundreds of millions of people tune in when we do it on this day. Yeah.
And that's, but in all honesty, it is like kind of the most exciting day around the league when it comes to competitiveness, and maybe the Stanley Cup playoffs is one of the most pivotal moments in the season where you kind of realize, hey, these are the real contenders because the teams kind of identify themselves, right? Yeah. And then
depending on the organization, I mean, it might be the one of two times a year you hear from your GM, so
Yeah, and it's not only the teams that are being competitive, it's also the two big networks up in Canada trying to break trades. So it's like it's a pitched battle between TSN and Sportsnet, and then you have like interlopers like Hockey Buzz and a few others that are trying to get a rumor and a trade here or there. But yeah, it's very competitive and usually a very interesting day. But I looked at the stats that the NHL put out. I think there was 20 deals made on deadline day, and that was that was down by like 12 from last year on deadline day. So the pandemic obviously affected a lot of things, and the lack of cap room affected a lot of things.
Yeah. Hey, Yariv, I've got one surprise thing to bring up that I heard just before coming on here, and I thought you would find it interesting. I think Mike will. So I was watching Pardon the Interruption, and I like the end of it. I don't like the whole show, but when they go fast at the end, there's some things you can learn. And they said that, hey, tonight Steph Curry needs blah, blah, blah points to pass Wilt Chamberlain. And for Philly, people here, he played in Philly, but he played for the Warriors first and passed Wilt Chamberlain for the all-time points leader for the Warriors. And, my mind, initially goes, well, Steph Curry's been shooting 3-pointers for 12 years. That's a big edge. And then so I look it up. Wilt only played 6 years there, and Steph Curry's played 12 with a 3-pointer. So Michael Wilbon let that go, by the way. He instead of arguing it, Michael Wilbon argued about Ronald Acuna and going to first base against the Phillies being safe against the metrics of it, but he didn't argue the fact that Steph Curry is passing a guy that it took twice as long with the 3-pointer. He let all of that go, and that kind of bugged me. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
Oh, excuse me. Wilt Chamberlain was a foot taller than everybody when he played. So
still have to put the ball in the bucket, Mike.
Oh, okay. Make me as tall as Manute Bol, and I'll stand right under the basket and go boom, boom, boom all day.
He didn't. He couldn't.
Is he good?
Oh, he didn't score that many points.
He scored 100 points in a game for crying out loud.
Not Manute Bol. Manute Bol.
Manute Bol actually shot 3-pointers, if you remember.
Yeah.
No. I think there is something to that, to perspective. I mean, even though you don't want to compare the two, but for his time, the dominance, the pure dominance. I mean, you could say the same thing about Gretzky, right? Like, what would Gretzky do today? He'd still probably be top of the league, but would he put up, 92 goals in a year?
No, he wouldn't put up 92, but you know what? I still think there would be years where he'd put up 60 because he still would be smarter than everybody on the ice, and he would have trained better.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's kind of like, so let me ask you.
Mike doesn't think that, though. Ask Mike what he thinks, because he's going to give you something else.
I don't think Wayne Gretzky was even the best player in the NHL when he played. I think Mario Lemieux was a better player.
Yeah, Wendell Clark, right, Mike?
No, I said Mario Lemieux. I didn't say.
Okay, Wendell, it sounded like Wendell Clark in my ear.
Mario Lemieux.
Okay.
This is a great start already. Wait, you're seriously
This is a jab.
So in your mind, is Lemieux really the only thing that held him back was potentially either maybe the team around him, which eventually had an elite team around him, but also health?
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, but I mean, his early years. I mean, remember he made Warren Young and Rob Brown into goal scorers. I mean, Gretzky did the same thing when he first entered the NHL. His line mates were B.J. McDonald and Brett Callaghan. You don't remember those names because they weren't very good players, but he made them into good players. But then he was also surrounded by Messier and Anderson and all the players that we do know. And Lemieux, eventually, it took trades that they made to bring in Ron Francis and other players that they surrounded him with a good team. But I just look individually that Lemieux scored 199 points 1 year, 85 goals, and he didn't win the MVP.
Yeah, that's a rough year.
Yeah, Gretzky won the MVP that year, and he had 30 goals less, and they gave Gretzky the MVP.
Imagine if the Professional Hockey Writers Association voting was transparent back then.
Yeah, I don't know what that's like. So,
but let me ask you something, because I wasn't really around for majority of Gretzky's like golden era, right? So was it like he could do no wrong even if he did do something wrong?
No, I wouldn't say that. I would say it like this. And look, I grew up a Ranger fan, so until he became a Ranger, he wasn't my favorite player because he would just score a million points against my team, right? But I think what it was about Gretzky was, yes, he definitely was smarter than everybody. Even Messier, and who I've interviewed a million times, while we all love Mark Messier, he will admit that Wayne Gretzky made him better, because Wayne Gretzky was that guy that would lead you with a pass that you didn't think was a scoring opportunity. He would take shots on net that the goalies weren't ready for. He would sometimes surprise you with a speed burst. He wasn't the greatest skater, but once in a while he could surprise you and just turn it on for a second, turn a corner on a guy and shoot it in. He didn't have the best one-timer. I mean, there were guys with better one-timers, but he just knew how to beat the goalie, how to set up a play, and he was always thinking a step ahead. He really was.
His anticipation was better than anybody I've ever seen. I mean, Russ is right. He didn't have the greatest shot. He wasn't the fastest skater. I mean, McDavid, McDavid.
Oh my God, he would skate circles.
Right, exactly. But there was he had this innate sense of being 3 steps ahead of the play. He could lead passes to players behind the back stuff. He wasn't overly flashy. He was just incredible in that respect, but he also had advantages. And this is, Russ knows that this is like one of my pet peeves. I mean, he had to be protected. He had Dave Semenko on his wing, and if you touched him, you were dead. Yeah. And I mean, that's
that era.
Right in that era. But there was a player named Bill McCreary who played for the Leafs back in like the late 70s. Not the Bill McCreary who's the referee, who deemed to hit Gretzky at center ice and laid him out, and Gretzky was, crumbled, and he never played a game again. I mean, they went after him, but then he got sent to the minor. He wasn't a very good player, but it was almost like, oh my God, you touched Gretzky,
that's
you touched the savior, get away.
Because like Hockey Canada, right? Oh, it's like that's Hockey Canada.
Yeah, that was Hockey Canada. One other thing though, he wasn't even a good penalty killer, but he played on the penalty kill because he was such an offensive weapon.
Yes.
Yeah. That was the other thing. All he had to do was sort of stay up around where, you would say the top of the key is on the hook, and they would just get him the puck. And again, the other team, everybody's in so deep on the power play, he would just kill them on the shorthanded goals.
Right.
So, let me ask you this, Russ, as a Rangers fan, how did it feel watching him kind of become a Ranger?
It was amazing. It was one of those things where, I started hearing rumblings like, hey, Wayne Gretzky's going to go somewhere again. And then, eventually Neil Smith trades for him. And I watched so many games that year. So many, because he was on the same power play as Messier. Sometimes they would play a little bit together in games. They'd sneak him in there. People forget that first year, he was really good. Like he had 67 assists, something like that. And that's a pretty good year out of Wayne Gretzky. He couldn't score goals anymore. I think he had 8 or 9 goals, but he still had the assists, and he had a horrible neck. Like that was the thing that really did him in. But in 97, until they met with the Flyers, which I didn't think they were going to beat the Flyers, to be honest. it was just fun watching the Ranger power play. That Ranger power play, because of Messier and Gretzky, was so good.
Yeah. Obviously my memories of Gretzky are less pleasant.
Yes.
But the funny thing is that after tearing out the heart of Maple Leafs fans in '93, which is the closest that they've ever they've gotten to the Stanley Cup final since winning it in '67. He got traded at the deadline to St. Louis, where Mike Keenan was coaching, and they lost to Detroit in Game 7, I think, of the second round, but it may have been it was second round. And he was a free agent. And a lot of talk was the Leaf, his father was a Leaf fan and that he wanted to sign with Toronto. And of course, this was, the Gilmore era Leafs were sort of going downhill, and Gretzky would have basically been the 1-2 center, him and Gilmore. And Steve Stavro, who owned the Leafs, said he couldn't justify spending the money on Gretzky, and he ended up going and signing as a free agent with the Rangers. But, I don't know whether my disdain for Wayne Gretzky would have changed if he would have played with the Leafs, because I don't know whether his presence along with Gilmore would have gotten them a Stanley Cup. I mean, the Rangers, they did get to the conference final, but that Leaf team wasn't good enough around them to really get that far. So I think I still would have not liked Gretzky.
Yeah, it's possible. I think the other thing, Yariv, I would tell you, when I got an inkling, and I was still not in the media, that this might be the last year for Gretzky, in '99. I've got the '99 hat. Or was it? Yeah, I think it was '99, right?
2000, I think.
One of them.
No, 98, 99.
Yeah, 98, 99 year. Yeah. So when I got the inkling, I started getting tickets, right? Because I wanted to make sure I could see, his last batch of games. I go online. I literally got tickets at Brendan Byrne with parking tickets for the price of 2 with parking for what I would pay for 1 at MSG. I didn't get to that final one at MSG. It was just too much money for me. I went in Philly because I had a connection with the guy who owns Super Pretzel, Jerry Schreiber. And so I got in his box for that.
Oh, that's awesome.
And that night he scored his 100th point against the Flyers, which to me is incredible because it's not like they played the Flyers all the time.
Right.
Wow. Oh man, that's a cool memory. See, I actually started watching hockey right as Gretzky was retiring.
Okay.
So I kind of missed majority of his career. I started watching as Lindros just got pummeled, by literally I had this miserable period here. Yeah. The closest thing I ever had to Gretzky was Peter Forsberg. He was my favorite player, actually.
Yeah.
And then coming to the Flyers was oh my God. I was as a kid, I was mind blown. And then the Chris Pronger, those are the closest things I've had to something like that.
Well, Forsberg was great.
Yeah, I loved him. All right, let's talk about Flyers, because we got a lot of misery and then some cool stuff to talk about as well with the trade deadline. It was actually pretty exciting trade deadline overall, even though not as many moves. I would say there was some exciting moves, but the Flyers kind of come short. They had an opportunity. To kind of build some momentum, but as the season has gone, every 2 steps or step forward, the Flyers seem to take a step or 2 steps back and then end up right back as a kind of bubble team. They had maybe the worst month of hockey I've seen from the modern era team, including the Hackstall teams, I would say. And that was a pretty low dip. They had an opportunity to close out a game. They're up 2-0 in the first. They blow that lead in the second. They go up 3-2, and within about 30 seconds, below the game against the Sabres. Mike, I'm going to open up to you first because I feel like the Sabres. I feel like this might be a good opportunity for you to step in first. Flyers kind of blow this lead. They come in. They come into an opportunity into the trade deadline. How do you look at the Flyers kind of blowing that lead after being, pretty much the most inconsistent team in the division, I would arguably say?
Well, I mean, Russ and I have been sort of on the same page when it came to the Flyers over the last month or so. I mean, I look at the standings and I look at the fact that they're chasing one team, the Bruins. The Bruins have games in hand and are ahead of them. And the Flyers had not played well lately and then lose to arguably the worst team in the league, although the Sabres are playing much better since they fired Ralph Kruger. So to me, I thought they should be sellers because I don't think they're making the playoffs. I understand there's a motivation maybe with management to stay the course, but I think they took a prudent direction. They sold who they could sell in Gustafsson, who was a terrible acquisition. From the very moment they signed him, I thought it was idiocy that they signed him for $3 million. I mean, basically as a replacement for Matt Niskanen, even though he wasn't taking the minutes that Niskanen was going to play, he was supposed to come in as a power play specialist. It was an utter failure by Chuck Fletcher. And they traded him for next to nothing, a 7th round pick, and paid half the salary, and traded Raffl. The one thing I think they accomplished today was not trading a lot and then getting a lot and signed. So I think even though those moves aren't productive in terms of the here and now, I think generally they went the right way and they didn't go out and try to add, because I don't think even if they added a top 4 defenseman, they're going to make the playoffs. So I think Chuck Fletcher actually was like in reality instead of in fantasy land.
Yeah, Russ.
So my take on Chuck is he's done very little since last summer. I still feel like when we heard after the fact that Niskanen didn't really want to go in the bubble, but he did because he's a good guy and he likes the team. And so he went, didn't play his best hockey. Remember, he was a little different than he'd been, and that's probably because he didn't love being there. I think at that point, as a GM, you could have maybe anticipated there's a chance Matt Niskanen's not showing up next year. But on a hope and a prayer, they kept going with the fact that he's going to show up. And when he didn't, then there's that excuse, well, it's late now. I mean, I could try and fill in. So they get Erik Gustafsson, which that deal today just showed what a dismal failure it was, getting a 7th rounder next year, retaining 50%. It's like, that's just thrown away money. But anyhow, my issue is everybody's like, well, who would you have gotten on the free agency market? And that's not my issue. My issue is there could have been a trade made. And then everybody's like, well, how do you know he didn't make one? And it's like, I don't know. But a job of a GM is to make that trade. Whether you have to overpay or not, you have to anticipate what is wrong with your team. They didn't, right? They just tried to Band-Aid it up. So they go through the season with the team. It's, I think, obvious by mid-season they can't hold the lead. Most games they lose leads. That will be on the tombstone of this season, is they couldn't hold the lead. And so when that starts happening, I get when Fletcher said a while back, hey, we're going to try and make a hockey trade. No one's able to make a hockey trade in the flat cap, whatever world. So I think that was just lip service, honestly. I don't think there was ever a chance a hockey trade was going to be made for what they needed. So you look at that and you say, okay, going into this deadline, I think they did these moves last minute just out of ineffectiveness. I don't think you could use the excuse, and I did think it was an excuse when I saw the quotes, well, we were in it, but we're not, and Raffl's hurt, but he'll be back, so we got something for him. Like, to me, these are just all excuses. You could have looked at this team 2 weeks ago and decided to do what Doug Armstrong did and said, okay, you know what? I am going to make moves, get the maximum value for these guys. If we make the playoffs, great. But if we don't, at least I got ahead of it. He didn't get ahead of it. He was reactionary again. He's been reactionary on everything for over a year. And I think it gets glossed over and overlooked a bit. And I just think that's hurting them right now. Of course, the core and stuff is hard to trade. I get that. I'm not even putting that on him. Mm-hmm. But I'm just putting, and he had tremendous luck that JVR returned to form this year, because imagine if he didn't. So, yes. But those other things, there's more that could have been done, I felt. And if nothing else, you know what? There was a point I would have put Jake Voracek on the taxi squad just to make a point. Sending Gostisbehere through waivers wasn't going to make a point, because everybody knew he wasn't going to get picked up. He kept practicing with the team. He never left the team. So there really wasn't a message with that. If you wanted to send a message, you would have sent Jake Voracek on the taxi squad and left him for a couple of days. Then you might have gotten a message to the core. Hey, you know what? You guys got to wake up, and you guys have to do something, because you're not producing near enough for this team. And that's all of them. That's Giroux, that's Voracek, and it's just the way it is.
Yeah, no, I do. I think reactionary is the right word. I do agree. Now, here's the question, because I do agree he has been reactionary, and I thought a lot about this, because the Gustafsson trade, I agree with you. From day one, right, I never thought it was ever, and Mike, you said it in your statement. He was never here to replace Niskanen. He can't do it. I never thought he could. And quite frankly, when he was signed here, I don't dislike Gustafsson, but I'm like, my thought was Ghost was better immediately. I've seen both players play, and I'm like, I already know Ghost is better. So I was like, so you're not bringing him in to play even that. So if Ghost is better, then what are you going to do with Gustafsson? So at that point, that looked like kind of a Band-Aid. He didn't do anything else. He didn't bring in another center, which I thought he would. He never brought in a fourth-line center, which in my mind, I was like, okay, you let two walk, and you made no attempt to bring in some guy on a cheap contract for a year. He didn't bother doing any of this stuff. It reminded me of Hextall, and in the sense that he was very aggressive when he came here, right? He went out, he got Hayes, he got Niskanen, he got Braun. These moves worked. They made us competitive. But then we have this expansion draft, and this guy has been burnt by it bad in the past. I would argue he potentially lost his job because of it back in the day, because of the way he handled that. He traded off assets. I remember he protected Vatanen, I think, was a player, which today is a guy who gets waived, right? This is an offensive defenseman, not a guy you really want to protect. And like, I feel like maybe that got in his head a little bit where he was really planning around this expansion.
Oh, no. He protected Dumba. It was Dumba.
It was Dumba. Well, he traded for assets.
He traded Alex Tuck.
He traded Alex Tuck. He gave him away.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm thinking in my mind, is he concerned that that's happening? He sees, quite frankly, I think the Flyers' biggest problem is maturity. Like the preparation is clearly not there. That's the bad starts. The breakdowns, right, late in the game. I mean, these are mistakes, simple plays, lack of attention to detail, lack of focus, getting rattled, getting physically outmuscled. This is typically what happens to younger teams, right? Like, they don't look like they have enough vets, right?
Let me ask you, which is money better spent? Because you were like, well, they lost some centers and they let them walk. Pitlick signed for 1.7. That's half of what Gustafsson got, right?
Yes.
Wouldn't you have rather had Pitlick and even just a physical defenseman? You weren't going to replace the top four anyhow, but if you had a physical defenseman, at least you would have gotten another another aspect of the team that you didn't have covered for the same money.
Even like a guy like Travis Hamonic, like I don't know what's available. I'm making stuff up.
Hamonic didn't want to play anywhere other than Western Canada.
I assume that.
But I suggested this to Russ, and he probably wouldn't have played this year because he didn't sign a contract, and now he's a member of the board of directors of the NHLPA. But Ron Hainsey was a free agent. Ron Hainsey would have been an adequate Niskanen replacement, playing on a top pair with Provorov, because he played 20 some odd minutes with Ottawa last year. I didn't hear anything in terms of them going after a guy like him or somebody like him, or trading for a player like a Matt Dumba who might be available with Minnesota, because Minnesota's got a situation with.
I mean, we heard Dumba was available for a year.
He may be. Minnesota is in a situation with the expansion draft where they can only protect 3 defensemen. All 3 of them, I think, have no move clauses. So Dumba is the one, unless they protect 8 skaters, Dumba is going to get exposed. And I'm sure Fletcher knew that, being his old team. And I think Dumba probably would have been a perfect fit with Provorov, but he probably didn't want to pay the price that it would cost, which probably was somebody like either Konechny or Farabee or one of their young.
Or Frost,
one of their young prospects. And I get you don't want to trade those guys, but the lack of a replacement for Niskanen derailed this team completely. They never recovered from it.
Even when he was here, these problems that we're seeing now started happening. You don't think to some degree?
Yeah, but they weren't as magnified. Like
correct.
They did start happening, but again, I'll tell you why it didn't matter as much. It didn't matter as much because for some reason in the bubble, like Sanheim and Myers gave you this small sample size that made it seem like they were better than they were. They were more ahead of schedule than they were.
Sure.
Now that it was a different kind of season and travel was involved and more games were involved and you weren't showing up to the same rink every day, now you saw them sort of regress back, both of them. I mean, people got bristly with me about Sanheim. His offense has gotten better, but his defense has gotten worse.
Russ, I'd argue everybody outside of Farabee that is young has struggled. Every single one of them has taken a step back. I can't think of anybody outside of Farabee who's taken even somebody like Couturier. Yes, I wouldn't say he's playing poorly in any sense.
I mean, he's bad hit too, right? So we'll give him a little pass on.
And that's the thing. I mean, I think Giroux's been all right, but like overall as a team, like I was even looking at Hayes'
I don't think Giroux's been all right. I got to give you
really.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I think point wise, you would look at it and say it's not what you would think it should be. But there was something that Keith Jones or somebody said on the broadcast about a week ago that caught my ear. And that was basically for the last couple of weeks. And this was a quote, I think, from Vigneault. Giroux's been a great captain and he's really led these guys and whatever. Yeah. Did he do that all year though? You're talking about a couple of week window. And I think that is a failing.
Well, I wouldn't say all year. I would say in that month of March, when things were getting really bad, I would say Giroux's the first one to step up, and he started transforming his game.
Yes.
I don't think it was enough to transform the whole team.
But what about before that?
And that's how we got to that point.
Yeah.
Right? That's kind of, we didn't get to what we see now overnight. It was a slow process of, I don't know. I want to say lack of attention to detail. I like to say lack of maturity. But like for the same reason people are picking on Nolan Patrick. I mean, he's 22 years old. I don't care. He's not supposed to be a leader of my locker room. He's not supposed to set the tone in my locker room. So like, why are we picking on kids? Like, and that's why I understand why people knock veterans. But I'm like, at a certain point, do we have enough? Are there too many children in this locker room leading? And I don't mean like children, but again, I'm 33 and I am not prepared for a lot of things in life. And I think of myself at 25, did I put in the preparation to deal with something like today, which is a COVID season, right? It's abnormal.
Well, here's where I think we've really gone south with Giroux. And I think this is on him. Sure, it's on the team a little bit where they put him, but also, you know, he has input too. He could change that. He's got 7 power play assists. 7.
Power play's been.
And he used to be one of the biggest parts of the power play. Now, again, I know they've changed him. He's not on this wall. He's not on that one. But at the end of the day, if Claude Giroux is the captain, you know, huddles up with the coaching staff and says, you know, we could do it better this way. Can we try it? I'm sure they would. I'm just saying 7 assists when you're used to, I mean, this guy, there was a time he was getting, 30 or more on the power play. Now we're down to 7, and maybe he'll get 12 or 13 by the end of the year, maybe.
I mean, the special teams are a biggest reason why the Flyers are irrelevant this year.
Well, and again, this is something that I think Russ and I are sort of on the same page, and I yield to his more.
And we like to argue too. I mean, Mike was going to argue with me on Will Chamberlain, even though I was talking about Manu Paul, but it's okay.
I yield to his expertise on the Flyers because he sees them more often than I do, but sort of parachuting in on what I see from further away. It's time to blow up the core group of the Flyers. It really is. Now, Giroux's got a year left. So, maybe it would be easy to move him, but I maybe that's something that they could just let him play out the contract and either get him to come back on a lower salary. But a guy like Voracek with I think 3 years left at over $8 million, I think it's incumbent upon Fletcher to maybe retain salary and get him out of town. I think you need to move on with the core group being Couturier, Konechny, Hayes, and Farabee, and some of the younger players, because I think what this core group is, and it's never really been successful, or at least as successful as management and the ownership have wanted them to be. So I think that's the next step. Now, there are plenty of other teams right now in the same position. Calgary is probably going to blow up their core.
Yeah.
I can think of, St. Louis might be ready to make changes. There are teams out there that you could probably trade core player money problem for money problem, and maybe a change of scenery would work. But I think that is necessary for the Flyers, because right now I think their main problem is stagnation.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, stagnation is a good way to put it. I thought a lot about that with Voracek, and I don't think Giroux is going to go anywhere, to be honest. I could see him even re-signing and just kind of ending his career here.
Sure.
But Voracek, I do think, is that type of player that you could see moving on, probably finding success somewhere else. But again, it's kind of like you're saying, it's it's an ability to spark the locker room, bring in a different culture. Like, I love Jake Voracek, but I thought about it a lot. Like, is he the caring kind of guy who is always going to pull everybody forward with him? Maybe. I don't know him that well, right? Like, I don't know Jake Voracek, but is he like the type of guys that we used to have as assistant captain? Not so much. You know, he's not a Wayne Simmons. He's got other great qualities. I believe he'll punch people in the face for you. Like, I think Voracek will fight for you. And that's not a question. I believe he loves his teammates, but we're talking about the tone setting for a locker room of not just locker room, the bench, but of just that calm ease, right? Where you don't get rattled, which is something I think Matt Niskanen had in stride. Like, I don't think that guy ever got rattled by anything, you know, and I think that's kind of what the Flyers are lacking. If you can create a kind of trade where a guy like Voracek will go and give you offensive production, and maybe you have an extra defenseman who's a veteran defenseman, maybe an older one in his 30s, maybe makes $8 million a year. Like, I threw out the Brent Burns thing, but just as an example. But a swap like that is kind of what you're talking about, right, Mike?
Yeah, ideally. I mean, if it's, I always use the term crap for crap. But the problem is that, you know, Voracek is not crap. It's just he's a big money player. And I just think that, you know, his effectiveness over the last few years has been wildly inconsistent. If you can, you know, San Jose right now, you know, they're spending what, $25 million or $26 million on their top three defensemen. If you could get Brent Burns for Voracek, I think Fletcher would probably sign up for it. I don't know if San Jose would, and I don't believe Burns has a no move, but I don't think he wants to go anywhere other than playing in San Jose. Sure. It's a nice place to play. It's a completely different world than playing in Philadelphia. And I'm not playing down Philadelphia, but you know, Philadelphia is a rough town. When you're not playing well, they will destroy you. So I don't know if that deal would fly, but something like that. You know, something where a player is making an equivalent salary or fairly close, maybe that works. But there are not that many players out there that are making that kind of money that other teams want to trade.
Here's the other thing, too. So I'm looking it up. Giroux has 1 power play goal. Voracek has none. Voracek also only has 7 assists.
Yeah.
You're not going to survive that way.
Let me ask you something. When you watch the power play, what in your gut would you say is wrong?
Boy, it seems to be like this ever-changing thing. Like, I don't know. It's kind of like an amoeba. Like, you know, it never looks the same twice. It looks good when JVR wants to go to the net, and he did do that a lot early in the year. I felt like maybe he hasn't done it as much lately. I feel like the puck movement's good. I mean, they definitely have guys who could shoot at the point. I'm even okay with Provorov at the point because I feel like it's accurate. It doesn't matter if it's not a booming shot. But at the end of the day, I think they have trouble finding guys that want to shoot it. And I'm not saying that so the fans could yell, shoot the puck. It's kind of like you do have to have a guy that's willing to hammer it every time you give it to him on the power play, whether it's off the wall or from the point or wherever. There always has to be that guy. Like, you know, the Rangers have Zibanejad. Every team has a guy. Do the Flyers have a guy?
Couturier played that guy. Here's how I see it, Russ, is I think you nailed it, but I don't think the problem is like necessarily lack of personnel, maybe a little bit, you know, to your point. But I think having all of these options, this amoeba of a power play, which is what I see. It's, let's get the option from the right side and the left side and the right side and the left side and reverse and switch around.
Right.
At a certain point, there's no precision. And the way I see a power play is precision. Doesn't matter if the team can read what you're going to do, as long as you can perform it quickly, efficiently, and like I said, you have an extra man. So it's really about precision. That's where I've kind of harped on coaching on this, and it's driven me nuts. And I don't like blaming coaches, but I see the way the power play is used, and I'm like, I would rather. And I was interested in your point to why doesn't Claude Giroux say something? Maybe he has, maybe he hasn't. And I'm like, why isn't he just running the power play? Even when people knew it was happening, it was more effective.
Well, I'll tell you one thing that I noticed the last game the Flyers that I watched the Flyers play, and knowing JVR as well as I do from all of his years in Toronto, he is one of the best players in the league down near the net, at the side of the net, with that little inside move between the legs, or
Yep.
and they weren't using him in that position on the power play. And I'm like, I'm sorry, the guy scored, I think, half of his goals the last year in Toronto when I think he was over 30. I think it was 30, 35 goals. I think he scored like half of them on the power play, or his power play points were ridiculous. And it was all on the doorstep. And how you don't use him, how he's not just an anchor right there at the side of the net, I don't understand. So maybe it's a situation in terms of structure that is the failure of the Flyers.
Yeah, I mean, he's got 7 power play goals, which is pretty good, but he's got 13 on the year. But the way it was looking earlier, Yariv, I thought JVR was on pace for like 25 goals.
Yeah.
Now that he has 13, he's probably not getting 25 goals.
No. Well, everything's slowed down, and the power play is found. It's funny. It's like around 20%, yet has found zero consistency. Like that percentage is extremely deceiving, because one night it'll be very effective, and then all of a sudden it'll have like a couple showings will just be completely ineffective in the same game. It'll do absolutely nothing, and I find it very interesting. I think personally the power play gets by purely on talent.
Oh, it does. I mean, Gustafsson is the perfect example, because it's the only place on the ice he looks good. Is on the power play. And I'm not saying that to be mean.
No. I understand. That's his specialty.
But that's his specialty. And yes, he could still hammer the puck. And now he's getting it on net again. But, it's the other things, the turnovers and other things that sort of come into play. But it's the one place where he does look good. And I do think they do get by on talent.
Yeah.
I think that's accurate.
And that power play shorthanded goal that they gave up against Boston, Mike, I don't know if you saw that, but that when you watch, even as an outside viewer, if you were just to watch that game, Mike, and you just stumble on and you see that goal the Flyers give up, you're like, this team's not going anywhere. Like when you see a team give up a goal like that, you're like, forget it.
The first one, which I guess made it, would that make it 2-2 or to make it 3-2? They made it 3-2 with Buffalo, right? When the 3-2 goal went in, I was like, it's over. You could almost see that they all exhaled at the same time, because Gustafsson tied it up, right?
Yep.
And you could almost feel like they were like, all right, this is the Sabres, we got this. And they didn't have it.
No. And it's really upsetting. All right, let's talk about some fun stuff. Let's talk about the rest of the league for a little bit here. There were a lot of trades that were exciting, at least to me personally. Just to name a couple, but I'll let you guys kind of give your overall thoughts, each one of you. But just, the Hall trade was obviously a huge trade to Boston, and that, obviously they did not give up much to get him, and that makes sense. Again, we were talking about money, how important money is right now, just actual cash dollars, and how much value it actually has to an organization. The Savard trade, I think, is kind of a robbery. The Foligno trade, they obviously got a lot for him. That one I actually get a little bit more. The Jeff Carter trade to the Penguins, which obviously is a knife in the wound to all Flyers fans. And we would have loved to get him for a playoff run. Everybody knows that. And then, just to name one big one, the Mantha trade obviously was a huge trade that I don't think most people saw coming to some degree, because I think what that Mantha trade is, and again, they gave up a lot to get him, but that's the cost of getting a guy that a team doesn't need to move. Like they don't have to move Mantha. They chose to move Mantha because it seems to me like the Caps are getting aggressive, and I can appreciate that. And apparently they had a problem with Verona. So interesting day. Mike, you had a long day to talk about this. I'm sure you're kind of going in circles at this point, but I'd love to get your thoughts on just overall thoughts on the day. Who you think maybe won, lost, what you thought was intriguing.
In terms of winners, in terms of teams that made the move that they needed to make, Tampa Bay adding a top 4 defenseman in David Savard to me was a coup, because they were right up against the cap. And if you notice, all the teams that made the contending teams that made the big deals, they all used the same sort of blueprint. Savard with Tampa, Foligno with Toronto, and the Islanders with the Palmieri Zajac deal. There was all salary retention or using a third team as a middleman to eat at least 25% of the cap hit. Getting a top 4 defenseman in Savard, adding that to Sergachev, McDonough, and Hedman, and they're getting they're getting Kucherov back at the beginning of the playoffs with Vasilevsky and Stamkos and point. I mean, it's obscene how good they are. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to win it, because I thought they were going to win it 2 years ago and they got eliminated in 4 straight by Columbus. So nothing is for certain, but they addressed their big need with Savard. I said that the Islanders were not going to get out of the division unless they replaced Anders Lee. They did with that trade with Palmieri. I think he's an adequate replacement. They're going to play the Barry Trotz style, and if they get enough goal scoring, they could go pretty far. I'm a little biased, but I loved what the Maple Leafs did. Getting Foligno. Foligno is exactly the type of player that they needed as a top 6, top 9 forward, a veteran guy who knows his role, will come in and play heavy hockey. And that's the type of player that they were really missing. Getting a goaltender to help Campbell, because I'm not sure if Anderson's going to play again, and a depth defenseman in Ben Hutton, and a depth forward in Riley Nash. I mean, they made really good moves. They traded a lot of draft picks for it, but I think it was right for it. Yeah, I think it was right for the Leafs to go for it. Now, in terms of losers, the Buffalo Sabres are losers. They didn't get a first-round pick for Taylor Hall. They got robbed in the Eric Stahl deal. The only deal that they got, I think, a decent value for was Brandon Montour. They did terribly. And
right. I don't know if it was terribly. Anders Bork is a very talented player. Yeah. Again, he wasn't really getting great opportunities with Boston. He would get 6 games here, 10 games there. He could really skate, and I do think he could finish to some degree. So I don't think
I like him a lot. I
don't think they did terribly on that. Remember, he played with Eichel
first at all.
Yeah, and they played with Eichel in the NTDP too. So that's a nice thing where you have guys who are familiar with each other.
I just don't think in a deadline where Palmieri gets a first, Mantha gets a first.
Yeah, but Palmieri's doing better than Hall. He's scoring better than Hall.
Right, but I think it's the value of the player, not the year that they're having.
Well, I don't know. When you're renting, I disagree. I mean,
you don't think it's a leverage thing? It's just that the Buffalo Sabres are just a disaster.
No,
and they're
I don't
just
think it's a leverage thing. I do think
just get rid of them.
I think Kevin Adams worked as hard as he can. He doesn't have a lot of experience in the position, so I do think more experienced GMs maybe got a little bit of the better of them. I can't say they didn't, but I look at it and I say, with Palmieri as an example, I thought, if you go back in the day, the Islanders hated Butch Goring. He was unbelievable in the playoffs, and they won a Stanley Cup, right? I think he could be something close to that. He already scored for them yesterday. He's a perfect fit. They know him. He knows that team, and so it's seamless, right? And Zajac could be very unheralded for faceoffs and defensive forward play, and so that's something where he could come in. Yeah, he could just be one of those additional guys that you need. So I do think it gives the Islanders a chance to come out of the division. I still think it's going to be hard, but it gives them a chance. So the Mantha thing, he could have been traded 2 years ago. So I can't say I was shocked. Oh, okay. It's just that we just didn't know when it would happen, right? And I felt like Yzerman.
Jimmy Devellano finally got the ear of somebody to make that deal.
Yeah. And if you don't know what that's about, just go search Twitter and you'll find it.
Right.
But anyhow, I looked at it and I was like, I really like Vrana because he's really fast, he's skilled, and I think he could even score more than what he's doing now when given more opportunity. And I don't look anything into they were like, well, they scratched him lately, whatever. That's Laviolette. Laviolette scratches guys all the time for messages. I don't look into that. Now, Mantha does have a hell of a shot. He's still got one of the best wrist shots I've seen, and he does have good speed burst. He's getting older. He's not a long fast. He's not like a really fast guy. He's a little older, but I do think if you have certain guys feeding him the puck, he'll do better. Just with that change of scenery, he probably did need a change of scenery. So I felt like Yzerman got a little bit of the better of that trade, but still effective though for Washington because end of the day they did add a goal scorer to their Stanley Cup hopes, and that's what you want to do.
I thought it was a really good trade. Sorry to cut you off, Mike. I thought it was a really good trade for both teams, actually. Mm-hmm. Have a team with a goal scorer that they're used to in Ovi that's not at the end of his career or anything. He obviously can still play. I mean, without a doubt. But they're adding another guy like that to maybe even build slowly behind him, probably long term. I imagine you want to keep Mantha. And then Yzerman gets what he needs, right? A slew of assets, which is what he really needed. Another guy in Verana who's a pretty good player, right, to keep him competitive. And then Panik, who maybe will play.
Yeah, Panik may get bought out, or maybe they just let him skate for a year. Who knows?
A win-win.
No, and in that regard, I think that's fair. You going to say something, Mike?
Yeah, but if you look at, and we said, oh, there's a difference in salary, but if you look at the salary hit for both Verana and Panik, it equals Mantha. Right. Panik was making about 275. Verana was making 3.3, and Verana is a restricted free agent at the end of this year, and more than likely they were going to have to, he would get a raise. I mean, he's having a fairly decent year. And, I think they saw, okay, we have cost certainty when it comes to Mantha. He's got 3 more years on his contract at $5.7 million. And in this instance, we get rid of Panik, who basically was waived and was not somebody that Laviolette was ever going to depend on. And Verana was going to cost him more. So in a way, it was a trade for cost certainty, but that trade cost them a first and second round pick on top of those 2 players. So it was very, very pricey for cost certainty, but maybe they believe they have an upgrade in Mantha, who, if he's playing with the right center, if he's playing with Backstrom, if he's playing with Kuznetsov, he could light it up.
I would say the last thing I would add is I like what Florida did. Getting Montour was good. I felt like they didn't give up too much. That's one of those where I felt like if they'd have retained, Buffalo would have retained salary, they could have gotten a second instead of a third. I think Buffalo took a misstep on that one, and Bill Zito got the best of it, maybe in that regard. But also them getting Sam Bennett was very good, but also Calgary getting Emil Heineman is very good. Heineman can play. This guy can skate. He's a playmaker. I interviewed Brian McCabe a couple of months ago, I think just before the season began, and spoke to him about other players, and he just, started talking about Heineman. Actually, it wasn't before the season began. It was before the World Juniors, and, was excited to see what he would do in the World Juniors. And so this is a guy they really liked organizationally, but again, Sam Bennett. So if you can get a Sam Bennett, you are going to have to give up something. But I don't want people to think like they, like Calgary fans, that they got nothing, because that's not the case.
No, they definitely did. I actually thought the return they got for Bennett was pretty good. I thought it was around what the Flyers would have got for Laughton if they choose to move on from him.
Yeah, but they weren't moving him. We all knew that.
No. Well, I think it's obvious with a 5-year deal that they clearly got a good return offer for him. And that probably is what led to that contract, I would argue, because if you do move Laughton, whoever is getting him is probably re-signing him. He's probably not making it back to you, even if you have a handshake deal with him. So reality is that they knew they either have to keep him or they trade him for, a second and a prospect, which they don't necessarily need. It's not something the Flyers are really lacking, is a second round pick. And yes, it helps, but they could, right now we'd rather use Laughton and have him part of the future if we can hold on to him.
So I think we need to do some prospect talk, because if we do a second show and never talk about prospects.
Yes, I was actually just about to switch to that.
It's going to be a failure.
Yeah, so let's talk about this. So the Phantoms are actually exciting for the Flyers. There are some big developments in general within the Flyers, like youth. Obviously, Elliot Denoyer is still doing excellent. All throughout. To be honest with you, the guys who've been playing, like even in the minors for the Flyers, both of the guys, Tyson Forrester and Zayd Wisdom, both of them have done exceptional, beyond expectations down there.
One thing about Denoyer is we have to remember the Q has teams not even playing, right? So the competitive balance there is a little off this year.
That's good to know.
So the points are definitely going to be higher for a guy who really could score like Denoyer too.
Yeah, and that's good to know as well. So let me ask you this. So we have a bunch of young players in the organization. I do want to talk about first and foremost, though. I'll talk about Cam York. He just signed. He's coming over. He should have played with the Phantoms. They've had a few games delayed here because of COVID protocols. Mike, what are your thoughts? I'm sorry, Russ, what are your thoughts? And then Mike.
Yeah, my thoughts are definitely let him play with the Phantoms first. Yeah. If you want him to finish out like the last 3 or 4 with the Flyers, that's fine. Even though he gained 10, 15 pounds of muscle, put that picture out on Instagram, and I chatted with him about that when he was in World Junior Camp. We laughed about it. he's still not strong enough in the corners and not strong as he could be. And so coming up into the NHL now, he's still going to be at a strength disadvantage. The skating's real good, obviously offensively real good, but he does need more strength. And I do feel like he is going to have to ratchet up his play even more when he gets to the NHL. So I think the AHL needs to be that next stop, simply to see how he does. Now, again, when we go crazy, or I would say some fans and other people maybe went crazy for guys like Wisdom and Forster, remember, some of these AHL teams are playing ECHL goalies. Some of these guys have never even played in the AHL ever. That's how, because of the taxi squad, the general competitiveness of goalies in the AHL is way down. Some teams have, really good ones, but it is a factor. I do feel like some of these guys would actually have a harder time scoring in the Canadian Hockey League than against certain teams in the AHL, simply because of that goaltending. But Mike, if you want to talk about York, then I'll get back to the other guys.
Well, I mean, I agree that he should play with Lehigh. I know that there was talk about a week or so ago that, we'll put him right in the lineup with the Flyers. Yeah. You want to ruin a player, do something like that. Now, this is an odd year where players that should be playing in the WHL or the OHL are playing in the AHL, and they're clearly not being able to handle it. A kid like Jack Quinn, who's a Sabres first round pick, has actually put up decent stats in the American Hockey League. But we talked to Joe Yerdon on the Buzzcast, and basically said, he's sort of a fish out of water. He's a 19-year-old kid. He's only 175 pounds. He's getting pushed around. And you put York in the NHL at 5'11" and 175. I don't care if he's put on 15 pounds of muscle. He's not going to be able to – he'll be at a disadvantage. Let him play the rest of the season in the American Hockey League. Let him sort of get with it in terms of the pro game, and then give him a crack at training camp and let him ease his way in, instead of throwing him in and risk ruining him, which you can do with a young player.
I would agree.
Yeah, now Wisdom is putting up points. I do think he's putting up points with the brute force of his game, and he does play great along the wall. And the times I've watched, I've liked what I've seen, but his skating still needs work. And so we have to remember, even though there are some soon-to-be or future elite players playing in the AHL, the pace of play is still nowhere near the NHL. Right. It's not going to be. And so that's where a guy like Forster, who has a great shot and has these other abilities, you're not really seeing his skating deficiencies there, because they would only show if he came up to the NHL. And that's why you don't want to bring these guys up to the NHL. I'm glad the Flyers didn't do anything with Wisdom. Hey, had they sent him back to the WHL, I'd have been okay with that too. Right. But just the fact that, hey, let him get this time. Next year, most likely, they'll have a decision to make. And I guess they'll see how he looks out of camp to decide where he's going to go, whether it be Lehigh or the Dub. Either place would be fine with me. Again, I know people would probably think, well, why would you send him to the Dub? Because that would be a step back. But you can't look at it that way.
No, yeah.
You want to look at it from the opportunity standpoint, and for a guy to have the best season he can, because building confidence is such a big thing. We saw players at the NHL level this year lose some confidence. So imagine when a younger player, Casey Middlestad's probably the best example in Buffalo, where that is a guy who was losing confidence last year, and now he's oozing confidence again because Don Granato is actually letting him play his game.
No, that's absolutely huge. And I totally agree with you. And if I remember correctly, I think that was even something that Ron Hextall said back about TK, about Travis Konechny.
Yeah.
Where he's like, yeah, it's great that he's a great player. We'll let him go be in the OHL and be the best player in the league.
Yes,
then.
He did say that.
Right.
He says, let him lead the league in scoring, let him win a Memorial Cup, and then we'll talk.
Yeah, if Wisdom's that good, then you should have no problem dominating then, right?
Right. Now let's talk about Ron Hextall for a minute, only because
I'd love to.
The communication part aside, we'll never know for full whether that was true or not. I'll believe it's true and say, okay, that was his failing, right? But again, a lot of these prospects are his and Chris Pryor. And the coaches and the scouting staff too, but those two were instrumental in a lot of what they were doing. Hextall was instrumental in basically how the Flyers trained, changing their whole program. I saw it firsthand the first summer he was there. I've talked about it. I have a picture that I put on a few Sportsology articles of Sam Morin doing the high jump there, and everything was out there. They wouldn't give me numbers, and the next day they hit everything because they realized someone like me was actually interested in all that. But that's when they started expanding all the training and testing and everything, and that has carried forward. But also, he used to always say he would like to have a prospect island where he could just send guys to, and none of us would be able to report on them, and then have them come back 3 or 4 years later. I thought there was some sense to that from a fun standpoint, because I get where he was coming from. Now, he also has changed his ways a little bit, but you know what? He still wouldn't have rushed Carter Hart, and he still wouldn't have rushed anybody. And, you know, right now, you did get some mixed results out of Carter Hart, and I do think he's rebounding from it. But that is the part that Hextall was sort of talking about, where you want to see the best out of that young player can be when he comes up, rather than learning on the job. And I think, look, Hart had it weird because last year was in the bubble. He didn't have to do an away game. Away games were still his kryptonite a little bit, and he was able to get past that. But this year, when things started to go bad, he had never really experienced that. And that was something where he was going to have to overcome that. He's still young. And for a goalie, too, there's very few Carey Prices in the world that come up and are ready, you know, at a young age. Even Fleury got sent back down.
Yeah, but Price struggled too at points in his young career. He started off hot, and then all of a sudden, it happens. It
definitely happens. And so now Hextall is with the Penguins, and he takes over a team where at the time it looks like the Flyers are going to be the playoff team, the Penguins are going to be out of the playoffs. And now it's the exact opposite. The Penguins got hot. They pulled out like a 12-point lead on the Flyers. Now they picked up players. They picked up Jeff Carter. Mm-hmm. Now all of a sudden the Penguins look like a team again, where you have to at least respect them. They may not come out of the division or anything, but nobody's going to want to really play them because, you know, they're going to have guys that could really sting you, and you never know, right? But it is weird how this whole transition has happened. And I got to say, to me, that's the craziest part of this whole season.
It's been wild. Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. It's been a wild season, and the Penguins flip with the Flyers just had the narrative over. I just can't wait for the season to be over in so many ways.
And one more thing, you know, I don't know if I made it a point on your show the last time,
sure,
but I made it a point. I felt like it was a mistake that Fletcher let Friedman just go for nothing. I understand if team wasn't liking him or something, that's fine, but you still didn't have to send him down. You could have sent Morin down because nobody was going to claim Sam Morin on waivers. You knew they would claim Friedman. So what happens? And Friedman's only played a few games, but guess what? He won a game against Philly when he did it. And I do think there was something mentally that probably charged up the Penguins about that Hextall did that really helped that team. And I think that's been an underrated thing on their little charge as they started to get better.
Yeah, man, I wouldn't be surprised. I wouldn't be surprised, and it's been annoying because I actually love Hextall, so now I have to watch him. Like, I still love Ron Hextall. I appreciate everything he did here, and I don't have a problem with him not liking Comcast. I can appreciate that too to a degree. So, like, I get that also, you know? So it's definitely been hard. He did do a great job with the kids, and I think it's showing. That's kind of what, you know, we're talking about holding Scott Laughton here. It's like, I'm not that enthusiastic about a second round pick anymore as like I was. It's like, I don't need another second round pick player right now. I have tons of young players developing everywhere.
You need players to develop now.
Yes. And I need culture. I need to build my locker room. So, and this is kind of how I see the Bruins and why I think they handle transition better than the Flyers do, is that culture, that locker room. I always think back to this moment where I think it was Evander Kane had his stuff thrown into the shower by Dustin Byfuglien. Yeah. Right. And I'm nothing against Evander Kane personally, but I have a hard time believing that he's kind of like I buy all in type of guy. Like I am one of the team, and that showed. And I think that you build a culture around it. I don't know if the Flyers have that with the certain core they have that people are talking about. Well, I think it can be disrupted.
Well,
go ahead, Mike.
I can tell you from personal experience about Evander Kane in Buffalo that pretty much now he's calmed down in San Jose, but he was a disruptive force in the locker room and in public in Buffalo. A player like that is cancerous. Right. I think it destroys. Here's my favorite word: the esprit de corps of a team. You really
He's still using it.
Of course I do, because it fits. But the camaraderie in the locker room, they really, you can't have a player who's an individual like that.
Right.
I think it's destructive.
Better be a very strong locker room.
Right. Yeah. Right. And the thing is that, maybe San Jose believed that their locker room was strong enough to add him.
I mean, where are they today?
Right. Exactly. But where they are is less about Evander Kane and more about the fact that they're spending $26 million on 3 defensemen over the age of 30, and all on the sunny side or the downslope of their career. That's just bad management by Doug Wilson. But I don't know. I mean, you underestimate what it means to have a core group that is strong-willed, that is, the leadership that is, single-minded in purpose to win games. And that's where I question where the Flyers are at, because I don't not Giroux, because I think Giroux has been over the years somebody who's been a good leader, but
he has been.
But the players like Voracek, I think I question, and with other teams, like a team like Buffalo, I think individually Jack Eichel is a really good and really talented player, probably one of the top 5 or 6 centers in the league, but he hasn't proven yet, and the evidence is not there whether he's a leader in terms of leading the Sabres out of the darkness. Yeah. Either he gets hurt, which he can't help, or the team is not good enough around him, which he can't help. But he can do what he can, which is lead by example. And this year he had a bad year. So, but he's playing hurt, at least that's the indication. There are all these contributing factors, but at a certain point you just need that guy to lead and be that franchise player. The Leafs lucked out with Austin Matthews. Now, maybe he's not the biggest leader in the world. They recognize that. They went out and signed John Tavares, and the reason they're having success this year is because they've added Thornton and Spezza and
tons of
Simmons.
captains.
Yeah, they have 4. They have 4 former captains on their roster. Now, does that mean they're going to win the Stanley Cup? No, but I think they're better positioned to have success in the playoffs because they have that kind of leadership.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is none of us have been in the Flyers room this year, so I don't think the room is bad. I just think I think at times the team got madder at the media, like when they got mad at Mike Silsky and things like that, than they did it themselves for failing at certain points in games. And that's not to say they're not trying hard. I think it's just, I don't think enough of them held each other accountable enough. I think that's really what we're talking about. Looking in the mirror, that kind of thing. Hey, because again, they got stung by Buffalo before. You would have thought the last thing that would have happened is they get stung by them again. That's on them.
Absolutely. And that's what I meant about maturity, right? Yeah. That's kind of what I see too, is that it's not guys going like, oh, I don't like you. I don't like you. It's like when I see Sanheim, Myers, Ghost, Provorov. Okay. Ghost is not the youngest there, right? But he's had his own struggles. And then you have all the other young guys. Who's going to lean on who? They're all going to lean on Justin Braun.
Right.
I mean, I love Justin Braun. I'm sure he's a great guy, but he can't do it all, at least with Niskin. And Niskin could go out and do the job for them, right? If they got rattled, he could literally go out there and do the job.
Yeah. Braun doesn't have it in him to play that many minutes. He can't.
Right. You can't lead from the 4th line and the bottom pairing.
Correct.
Right. Your leadership has to be a top 6 forward or top 4 defenseman.
I don't disagree with that.
Or goalie.
Yeah, which I mean, it's best if they can always lead. The one thing I think is really interesting about what you said about Eichel is one thing I hated the Edmonton Oilers did. I hated this, and I'm probably a minority, but I hated that they made Conor McGregor captain immediately.
I'm
sorry. That's funny.
McGregor's a good fighter, but Conor McDavid's not.
Right, yeah. But I hated that they made him a captain immediately. It drove me absolutely nuts. But look, he's a kid. He's coming to your organization. You're saying, I don't know. Here.
I mean, the Flyers did that with Mike Richards, and it worked for a little while, but they did it too early too.
Yeah, and that's what I said. It's not that I think the player is inadequate. I think McDavid is a special, very, very special individual as a human, and no doubt about it. He can handle it. He's showing he can handle it. Having said that, why do that to him? You could bring an adult to lead for 2-3 years.
Some teams believe that you make your best player the captain, but sometimes your best player isn't a leader. I mean, the Leafs' best player, the Leafs' best player is Austin Matthews.
Yeah,
Austin Matthews may have done the Leafs a favor by that unfortunate incident in Arizona with that showed his immaturity, because he was only a 22-year-old kid. So he did something stupid. Sure. He apologized for it. It's past now. But I think that incident contributed to the decision to make John Tavares the captain. And I think John Tavares is just a solid guy. He's not the most exciting player in terms of, his personality is very sort of sedate. And that's perfect for Toronto. He's a boring interview.
Yeah, I'll give you a perfect example where it didn't work for a captain, and he was a great player. Messier's gone from the Rangers. He's doing, Lay's potato chips commercials and sinking the Vancouver Canucks for all they're worth money-wise. And Brian Leetch became captain. And he was a terrible captain. He was still a great player, but you could tell after a while he just didn't even want to be captain. And it was just one of those things where it was a bad fit. And if you bought a Brian Leetch captain's jersey, that's on you, because you should have realized that wasn't going to work out as a fan.
That's so funny. But I mean, Flyers had that with Desjardins. I mean, he took it and then gave it back, which is the only time I've ever seen that. And who
was the one captain you feel like the Flyers had that most people could never identify? I know I have one right now in my head. Yeah.
Jason Smith.
Jason Smith's the Gator.
Yeah. He barely could move his arms by the end of the season. He was a warrior, though. That was the bottom pairing captain. To your point, Mike.
That's the answer. Well, for the Sabres, when they made Craig Rivet, they traded for Craig Rivet from San Jose and immediately made him the captain. And I'm like, what the hell are you doing?
Yeah.
He's a better radio talk show host than he was a captain.
He is.
Maybe that's why they like it. All right. We're getting close to the end. Any more comments on prospects? Anything you guys want to mention?
That's too broad.
I know it's too. Well, actually, there is the Frozen Four coming up. Are they still doing that? Or they?
No, it's over.
It's over. Okay. Any comments? Anything that fans should be? You know what? Let's do this. The Flyers have a potential to actually draft somewhere this year in the draft. What are your thoughts going into this draft? Do you think it's going to be?
So I have an early draft list. And it's really early. It's going to change a lot. I'll probably change it as the under 18s are going on at the end of the month. Right.
Okay.
But where the Flyers might go, I only have 20 on this list. I think they'll be somewhere. What if you don't make it? What do you end up? 17,
they're
18,
gonna be
19?
like 13, they're gonna be like 13th, 14th pick.
Yeah, 13, 14. That's right. So as an example, if I went by this list, Mason McTavish, I have at 13. I mean, he's a hell of a player. He's a really hard worker, good around the net, excellent one-timer. I have a guy, Zachary Laheru, who is another guy from the Q, excellent speed, great eye, great
Halifax.
Yeah, he's really got great eye-hand coordination. He's another guy that really helps his line mates. They've done a good job. The Flyers have done a good job with guys from the Q before. Maybe they dipped there again. There's another kid who, Dylan Duke, he's on the actually, I'm going to say Red Savage. I think Dylan Duke may drop a little bit for me, but Red Savage from the U.S. development team, he was really good in the All-American Prospects game. He scored at least 1 goal, 1 assist. He can do some things on his own around the net. He's got great hands, and he's a terrific directional skater. He's really good with loose pucks. He said something really funny too, because I interviewed him post game after that, and for whatever reason, there weren't a lot of people on the line early on, and there were more people for the coach, not the players, right? And I think it was because it was late. It was like 11 when that game ended, and so I asked him the question. I said something to the effect of, "Hey, you were really decisive on that goal. Can you talk about your goal a little bit?" He said, "Well, my teammate really teed it up for me. And to be honest, I got a text after a game that said, you should have scored that goal because I could have scored that goal." Like a fan actually sent that to him. And he laughed about it. He loved that.
Nice.
All I have to say is I absolutely love the name Red Savage. I mean, it sounds like somebody just eats red meat, like raw meat. Red Savage.
I mean, there's another guy who maybe goes a little too early, Fabian Lysell. He's a faster player than McTavish. He's a little better passer, a little more high end, but McTavish has that hard working thing. So I think those guys will probably be in the area that the Flyers are in.
I don't trust any hockey player named Fabian after Fabian Brunson.
What are your thoughts on the draft, Mike? Do you think that this year the scout rankings will be accurate?
I don't know about that, but it's really tough to be accurate with so few games. I mean, I think that's why there were it was funny because Kevin Allen told us on the trade deadline buzzcast that there were some teams that were intent on not giving up first round picks. And there were other teams that were very readily willing and able to give up their first round pick. And that might be because they believe the quality of the draft isn't going to be great. You never know that, but I mean, a team like Toronto, they have 3 picks. They have a second, a fifth, and a sixth. They traded 4 picks from this draft. And Kyle Dubas said, well, we had 12 picks last year, and a lot of our picks, we overloaded, and some of them we haven't signed. So, we're confident enough in the young group that we already have on hand that, we felt we should go for it and go all in and trade some of those picks. And
I think that's right. I don't think they need to hit a home run in this draft where it's going to be harder to hit a home run, to be honest. Right. And I think he looked at it that way and said, let's take a calculated risk here. And if you remember, Mike, we had this conversation on Off the Post where, and even Fletcher, Yariv, said this in one of his interviews. He said, well, half the league seems to think that, you don't want to pick as many times in this draft because, there's not as many good players or just not enough viewings, which is, true on both counts as compared to maybe next year when there is. So some may go not as deep. And then he said, and then some teams want more picks just for, hey, we're going to need more picks to identify half the players. And I think the Leafs did it the way I would have done it. I would rather divest from this one a little bit than load up for it, because I'll tell you, and GMs don't care, and I get it, but nothing looks worse than if you have a 12-player draft and at some point only like 2 of them make it or 1 of them makes it. Like Absolutely. There are teams that have had drafts that bad, and when you see it on paper, it's not a great thing to bring into your boss, the owner,
Well, that's a great point. Do you think by any chance, though, in this type of scenario, they're thinking, well, if I have, each draft pick per round, it's like, the first round's like 25% chance of being an NHL player?
No, it's higher. On the first round, it's higher. I think Shane Malloy always gives me his percentages, and so I like to quote his. I'm going to say first round is somewhere in the 40s, and then it starts dropping from there. And so, and it's probably higher in the top 10, obviously, too.
Well, yeah, but you think that on top of this year, right? That's why they would want all these picks, because you don't know. You might get, you might get a guy fall who's not supposed to be available. Sorry, go ahead.
Kevin Allen was basically saying that there are some teams that are approaching it as, let's get as many draft picks as we possibly can, sort of like the shotgun approach, like Detroit. I mean, how many thirds, how many fourths did they get in this draft? Okay, well, they can, like Russ said, they can move up into the second round if there's a player that they target, but they also can say, okay, well, we're not sure of this group of 3 or 4 players, but let's take all 3 of them and we're going to hit on one of them. So that's, in an inexact science, and you don't have as much empirical evidence as you normally have because you haven't seen these players as much. Right. It's better to have more kicks at the can than less. But, but that's Detroit. They're at the bottom of the league and they want those kicks at the can. And they're probably heavily invested in scouting, especially in Finland and Sweden, where they've always been able to hit with players, and Germany now with Sider. So, I mean, they're at the point where they probably, they want as many kicks at the can, but a team like Toronto who's going for it, they've got their young kids. They didn't trade any of their prospects in any of these deals. All they did was trade draft picks. All they did was add to their existing group. And, there are different ways to go about it. And those 2 teams went different ways because they're different stages.
As an example, Yariv, at the All-American Prospects game, there were 110 scouts, which isn't unusual. They've had that before. But for this year and for the past, year and a half, it's unusual. That's the most that's been at any game this year because, nobody has that many people in their building. So now you'll get that at the under 18s, which is at the end of the month in Texas. And those are primarily the two biggest tournaments. You're going to have still, a little OHL action. They might have that tournament right before the draft that they're talking about. And, the W and Q will have these playoffs, but, they'll be different and probably in competitiveness. So it's definitely a tougher year. There's no way around it.
It's a weird year. It's like either you're going to get screwed or maybe you're going to luck out and get somebody that maybe you shouldn't have got, which, maybe the Flyers will have some good luck after all the bad luck. All right, let's call it at that. This has been a very long podcast, and I really appreciate everything. Honestly, I love the story in the beginning as well. So thank you so much. Cool. And any closing thoughts, or actually, Russ, anything you have coming out that you want people maybe to pay attention to? An article?
No, I mean, look, you could still just go to my website, sportsology.com. You can go to Amazon, check out all the books. If you want any of them autographed, I have 9 books out. You could just DM me on @Sportsology on Twitter, or even just, tweet to me, whatever. If you're interested in something, same on Facebook, that's fine. Really go listen to, Off the Post, the Hockey Buzz Buzzcast.
Definitely.
Other things, you can read my stuff at Front Page Sports. That used to be a computer game. Full Press Sports. Yeah. Full Press Sports. And, so now just all of those things are great. And, the last thing I'll throw in there is, my grandmother used to have a favorite candy bar called the Cadbury Fruit and Nut Bar, and I haven't had one in like a million years. I saw one on the shelf today as I was grabbing some candy bars, and I got it, and I was like, you know what? It's still really great. So I'm going to leave you with that.
That's awesome. I never heard of that.
Yeah, try it.
I remember that. I remember that one, Russ.
Yeah.
I actually just went into a retro candy store. I bet they had it there. They probably had
No, it's from England, so I don't know if they would.
Okay.
It's imported, but places like Walgreens and stuff have it.
Okay.
I think I've seen that one up in Canada because Canada always gets candy bars from England. So
yeah. Mike, you got any closing thoughts or anything?
Well, Mike and Buffalo on Twitter, and if only DM me if you're offering me money. Now. I'm writing at Hockey Buzz covering the Leafs. I write for Full Press covering the NHL and the Buffalo Sabres at the Fischler Report. Off the Post. I'm doing everything. Off the Post podcast, Hockey Buzz
You're
podcast,
everywhere.
Leaf. I'm international. I'm nationwide, Russ. It's like I'm doing. If I'm probably every waking moment of the day, I'm on the air doing a podcast or a webcast or something. People are going to get sick and tired of seeing my handsome face.
That's awesome. Well, you get your 10,000 hours in, Mike. That's it. You're going to be an expert by the end at podcasting. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining. I really appreciate it. This was a good one. This was perfect. I thought right around the trade deadline, I used to sit around and watch Hockey Buzz, on the side when I was, so for me, this is kind of perfect. This is great.
Waiting for us to come up with things to talk about for hours.
Yeah, exactly. Especially on those slow days. Those are the worst.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much again. Thank you, everybody who listens. Like, subscribe, comment, please. That helps so much. Thank you for everything. Try to enjoy the season. Please don't beat yourself up too much. I notice a lot of people losing their minds. Really, you need to relax. Everything will be okay for sure. Remember to enjoy hockey, and definitely remember to always stay